Great talent wins games. Great stories win hearts. A club waiting 35 years for a major trophy. A midfielder who would score 20 league goals from the center of the park. A city on the brink of a power shift. This is the untold story of Yaya Touré, how a box-to-box force turned Manchester City from noisy neighbors into true champions. But how does a player once overlooked in North London and pushed aside in Catalonia become the heartbeat of a new empire in Manchester? Yaya Touré's legend isn't built on one miracle moment. It's built on a series of decisive acts that changed the destiny of a football club. In 2011, his right foot carved City's path out of the wilderness, the semi-final strike against Manchester United, then the winner at Wembley against Stoke City, ending a 35-year wait and proving City could deliver when it mattered most. That day rewired belief inside the Etihad and across Manchester. But Touré's rise to blue royalty is full of contradictions. In 2003, he was an almost signing at Arsenal, good enough to sparkle in a pre-season friendly, yet tangled in work permit purgatory and ultimately let go. Years later, Arsène Wenger would admit it as a regret. At Barcelona, he won everything, even sacrificing himself at center-back in the 2009 Champions League final because the team needed him there. Yet, as Sergio Busquets emerged, Touré's role narrowed. The Catalan dream didn't offer the space his game demanded. The solution was audacious: leave the greatest side of its era to become the cornerstone of a project still learning how to win. Manchester City gave him the canvas, and in return, he gave them definition. By 2013-2014, he authored one of the most outrageous midfield seasons in Premier League history. 20 goals from midfield, a blend of long-range thunderbolts, surgical free kicks, and those irresistible, steamrolling runs through the heart of defenses. This wasn't just dominance, it was a redefinition of what a Premier League midfielder could be. Still, every myth has a fracture line. What price did Touré pay to build Manchester City's new identity? This film is about power, how Yaya Touré earned it, how he used it to tilt a club's history, and how that same power sparked battles that would eventually push him to the margins. The stakes are simple. Without Touré's goals, leadership, and will in the early 2010s, City's ascent is a slower climb. With him, it becomes a surge, but power invites friction at Barcelona, at City, and most pointedly under Pep Guardiola. This is the journey from Arsenal's near miss to Barcelona's sacrificial defender to Manchester's midfield colossus and the personal costs hidden beneath the medals. From the streets of Boaké to Wembley steps, let's trace where that power was forged. Boaké, a bustling city in central Ivory Coast, is where Yaya Touré's story began. Born on May 13, 1983, in a country often scarred by political instability and economic hardship, Yaya's childhood was not defined by privilege, but by resilience. His family lived modestly, and football wasn't merely a pastime, it was a lifeline, a chance to dream beyond the confines of their neighborhood. Football ran in the Touré bloodline. His elder brother, Kolo, would later captain Arsenal and Ivory Coast, while his younger brother, Ibrahim, pursued the game until his untimely passing in 2014. In those early days, the Touré brothers played barefoot in dusty streets, using makeshift balls and goalposts. For them, football wasn't just sport. It was language, identity, and survival. At just 10 years old, Yaya caught the attention of scouts from ASEC Mimosas, the famed Abidjan academy that had produced a conveyor belt of African talent under the visionary coach Jean-Marc Guillou. ASEC was more than a football school. It was a sanctuary where discipline, education, and tactical understanding were instilled alongside technical skills. For Yaya, entry into this academy was the first great pivot of his life, from Boaké's chaos to a professional environment that would mold him into one of Africa's most complete midfielders. From the outset, Yaya stood apart. Unlike many peers, his game wasn't built solely on flair or dribbling tricks. He was taller, stronger, yet startlingly elegant with the ball at his feet. Coaches remember his ability to read the game, to anticipate passes, and above all, to carry the ball with stride length that devoured entire midfields. While others sought to dazzle in moments, Yaya imposed himself across games, an uncommon trait for a boy his age.
What drove him was not just talent, but a determination sharpened by circumstance. Civil unrest in Ivory Coast during the 1990s meant opportunities were scarce, and football became both an escape and a responsibility. If he succeeded, he could carry his family with him. That pressure, rather than crush him, became fuel. But raw talent in Abidjan was only the beginning. To test his mettle, Yaya Touré needed to leave home, chasing a European dream that would first humble him before it crowned him.
Yaya Touré's graduation from the ASEC Mimosas Academy marked the beginning of an odyssey few African players had endured in quite the same way. While many dream of a direct leap to Europe's elite, Yaya's road was circuitous, marked by uncertainty and constant reinvention. His first stop was Belgium with Beveren, a club closely linked with ASEC's academy. Arriving as a teenager in 2001, he encountered the sharp chill of European football, both literal and cultural. Life in a small Belgian town was a far cry from the vibrant chaos of Abidjan. But it was in Beveren's yellow shirt that European scouts began to notice the rangy midfielder who could both shield a defense and surge like a striker. By 2003, Arsene Wenger invited him for a trial at Arsenal. In a pre-season friendly against Barnet, Yaya played as a second striker, showing flashes of potential but not his natural midfield rhythm. Wenger later recalled, "He was completely out of position, but you could see he had something. Unfortunately, we couldn't get a work permit at the time." That bureaucratic snag closed the door on what might have been an early Arsenal legend, leaving Touré frustrated but undeterred. Instead, his journey took him east to Metallurg Donetsk in Ukraine. The football was tough, physical, and far from the glamour he sought, yet those 2 years hardened him. From there, he moved to Olympiacos in 2005, a turning point that finally brought him into continental competitions. In Greece, his driving runs and adaptability helped Olympiacos claim the league title. Touré even drew praise in the Champions League, where he faced Europe's heavyweights for the first time. The next step was AS Monaco in 2006. In League One, he showed he could dictate games in a major European league, blending athleticism with intelligence. By then, Yaya had evolved into more than a holding midfielder. He was a box-to-box force with an eye for attack. The wider footballing world began to take notice, and whispers linked him to Europe's biggest clubs. It was Barcelona who finally moved, signing him in 2007 for around 10 million euros. At Camp Nou, Yaya entered the biggest stage of his career. Initially trusted by Frank Rijkaard, he became a pillar in midfield. But when Pep Guardiola took over, a shift occurred. Guardiola favored Sergio Busquets, the homegrown talent, and gradually narrowed Yaya's opportunities. Ironically, in the 2009 Champions League final, Guardiola trusted him not in his natural role, but at center-back, a testament to his versatility, but also a signal that his long-term future lay elsewhere. Yaya Touré had proven himself across Belgium, Ukraine, Greece, and France, and even in the heart of Europe's greatest team. Yet, despite medals and recognition, he was restless. To unlock his true destiny, he needed a stage where he would not be a role player, but the main protagonist. That chance came in Manchester, where a bold move in 2010 would turn Touré from a journeyman into the cornerstone of a revolution. In the summer of 2010, Manchester City were no longer the punchline of English football. Backed by Abu Dhabi wealth, they were assembling a squad capable of challenging England's elite. Yet they needed more than money. They needed identity. In Yaya Touré, they found the heartbeat. Signed from Barcelona for £24 million, Touré arrived with pedigree, La Liga titles, a Champions League medal, but also questions. Could a midfielder, sidelined at Barca, truly command games in the bruising Premier League? The answer came quickly. In his very first season, Touré etched himself into Manchester City folklore. At Wembley, against eternal rivals Manchester United in the FA Cup semi-final, he pounced on a defensive lapse and drove the ball past Edwin van der Sar. It was more than a goal. It was a statement.
City had beaten United on the biggest domestic stage, and Touré was the executioner. A month later, under the same Wembley arch, he struck again in the final against Stoke City, the only goal of the match, delivering City's first major trophy in 35 years. For the blue half of Manchester, it was liberation. For Touré, it was vindication. That FA Cup run revealed Touré's essence, a player who could dominate midfield yet decide matches with a single surge forward. Mancini had deployed him in an advanced role, exploiting his ability to carry the ball through lines and unleash thunderous finishes. The experiment redefined him, not just a holding midfielder, but a box-to-box colossus who combined power with finesse. Beyond Wembley, Touré's influence seeped into City's identity. He brought authority, composure, and a winning mentality forged at Barcelona but sharpened by years of wandering. Teammates recall how his calm presence lifted dressing room confidence, while his competitive edge demanded higher standards. For a club desperate to break its underdog stigma, Touré's mentality was infectious. The media too began to pivot. Where once City were dismissed as noisy neighbors, pundits now recognized the spine forming, Vincent Kompany's leadership, David Silva's artistry, and Touré's unstoppable drive. The Ivorian embodied City's ambition, no longer content to be a supporting act, but determined to seize center stage. For Touré personally, the FA Cup wasn't just silverware. It was liberation from Barcelona's shadows. At Camp Nou, he had been a utility man, sometimes even a stand-in defender. At City, he was the hero, the match winner, the talisman. The contrast was stark and satisfying. By the end of 2010-11, Touré had not only delivered a drought-ending trophy, but also shifted the balance of power in Manchester. The red side had history, the blue side now had belief. And belief, once unlocked, is contagious. That breakthrough season did more than crown City with silver, it set the stage for their next leap, the Premier League title. And at the heart of it all was Yaya Touré, the powerhouse who had finally found his rightful stage. Yet, if 2011 was about proving City could win, the years to follow would show how Touré could elevate them into champions and redefine what dominance from midfield truly meant.
If Yaya Touré's arrival in 2010 had delivered belief, then the seasons that followed elevated him into one of the most dominant midfielders the Premier League had ever seen. Between 2011 and 2014, Touré was not simply part of Manchester City's rise, he was its driving force, the piston in the engine that powered the club into a new era. The 2011-12 campaign was the most symbolic. Manchester City had not won a league title since 1968. That year, Roberto Mancini's men surged into a fierce battle with Sir Alex Ferguson's Manchester United. Touré was the constant presence. His blend of power and poise allowed City to control games in a way they had never before. He was the player who could sit deep when needed, but also surge forward, carrying the ball through midfield lines like a locomotive. In May of 2012, with City's title hopes wobbling, Touré produced one of his finest individual performances against Newcastle United in the penultimate game of the season. With the pressure immense, he struck twice, first a long-range curling effort, then a late clincher, to secure a 2-0 win that effectively sealed the title race. A week later came Aguero's famous 93-20 moment, but within the City dressing room, many felt it was Touré's Newcastle brace that truly won them the league. That title was Manchester City's first in 44 years, and Yaya Touré was the midfield general who had made it possible. If 2012 showcased his ability to deliver under pressure, then 2013-14 revealed something even more astonishing: his capacity to dominate statistically. Touré scored 20 Premier League goals that season, a figure unprecedented for a central midfielder. He struck from free kicks with surgical precision, unleashed thunderbolts from outside the box, and executed penalty kicks with icy calm. No midfielder since Frank Lampard had scored with such consistency, but Lampard had played further forward. Touré was orchestrating games from deep while still finishing them. That season, his partnership with David Silva and Fernandinho gave City perfect balance. Silva weaving patterns, Fernandinho providing energy, and Touré rampaging through the middle with irresistible force. Opposition managers often spoke of the sense of inevitability once Touré began to stride forward. You could see defenders backing off, almost in fear, one pundit recalled. His long legs ate up ground, his frame brushed aside challengers, and his finishing was clinical. Beyond the numbers, there was a symbolic power in Touré's dominance. At a time when African players were still fighting for recognition on Europe's grandest stages, he was winning African Footballer of the Year 4 consecutive times, 2011 to 2014. Alongside Didier Drogba and Samuel Eto'o, he became an icon of the continent, proof that African midfielders could not only compete, but define the tempo of entire leagues. Comparisons flowed freely. Some saw shades of Patrick Vieira in his physical dominance, others glimpsed the long-range threat of Steven Gerrard, and still others likened him to Frank Lampard for his goal-scoring touch. Yet in truth, Touré was unique, a hybrid of all these traits, combined in a 6'2" frame that moved with deceptive grace. His aura extended off the pitch as well. In the dressing room, he carried himself with quiet authority. Teammates described him as someone who did not speak often, but when he did, his words carried weight. He demanded standards, often challenging younger players to believe in their ability as much as he believed in his own. For Manchester City, still forming their identity as an elite club, Touré was both a guide and an enforcer. The peak years also brought unforgettable set pieces. His free kick against Newcastle in 2013, swerving impossibly into the top corner, is still replayed as evidence of his technique. His marauding goal against Aston Villa in 2014, where he picked up the ball near the halfway line, bulldozed through challenges, and slotted home, epitomized his style. Brute force cloaked in elegance. By the end of 2013-14, City had won another Premier League title, and Touré had cemented himself in the PFA Team of the Year. That season alone might have defined a career, but for Touré, it was the culmination of years of persistence and reinvention. From the dusty pitches of Bouake to the summit of English football, he had arrived as not just a great midfielder, but as one of the most complete players of his generation. And yet, amid all the glory, seeds of conflict were quietly sprouting. The infamous birthday cake saga of 2014 hinted at deeper tensions between Touré and Manchester City's hierarchy. For all his brilliance, he often felt underappreciated, financially, emotionally, and symbolically. That sense of disrespect would later resurface in even sharper clashes with Pep Guardiola. Yaya Touré had scaled the mountain, redefining what it meant to be a midfielder in England, but at football's summit, new battles awaited. Not against defenders, but against politics, pride, and the unforgiving demands of legacy. Glory rarely lasts unchallenged, and for Yaya Touré, the cracks began to show almost immediately after his 2013-14 masterpiece. In May 2014, just days after lifting another Premier League title, his agent Dimitri Saluk publicly claimed that City had disrespected Yaya on his birthday. The complaint, framed around the absence of a proper cake, seemed trivial, almost absurd to outsiders. Yet beneath the laughter lay a deeper wound. Touré's belief that his contributions were undervalued by the club's hierarchy. This birthday cake saga became symbolic. It wasn't about confectionery, it was about recognition. Touré had given City trophies, goals, and identity, but he felt the affection and appreciation did not match his influence. The dispute soured relations, creating friction with executives and murmurs of discontent in the press. Though Touré continued to perform, the image of harmony between star and club had been fractured. A greater storm arrived in 2016 with the appointment of Pep Guardiola as City's manager. For Touré, the irony was cruel. Years earlier at Barcelona, Pep had preferred Sergio Busquets, edging Yaya out of midfield. Now in Manchester, history repeated itself. Guardiola's philosophy demanded relentless pressing, positional discipline, and slimmed-down squads. Touré, entering his 30s, was seen as expendable. Worse still, Pep demanded an apology from Touré's outspoken agent before reintegrating him into the team. For a proud player, the standoff was humiliating. At times, Touré was excluded from Champions League squads, his once dominant presence reduced to a peripheral role. Though he eventually returned and even produced flashes of his old brilliance, most memorably in the 2016-17 campaign, when City desperately needed experience, the writing was on the wall. The man who had once defined City's midfield now found himself watching from the sidelines, his influence waning. He admitted later that his relationship with Guardiola never healed, even suggesting that racial prejudice might have played a role in their conflict, a claim Pep vehemently denied. Regardless of the truth, the fracture marked the final act of Touré's Manchester City career. By the time he left in 2018, his farewell at the Etihad was tinged with both gratitude and melancholy. Supporters serenaded him as a club legend, remembering the goals at Wembley, the surges through midfield, the titles he had delivered. But there was also sadness, the sense that his final years had not reflected his true stature. The exit felt muted compared to the roaring heights of his prime. After City, short spells followed, an ill-fated return to Olympiacos, a final run in China with Qingdao Huanghai, but none carried the same weight. The towering Ivorian who once terrorized Premier League defenses was now a fading figure. His boots, which had stamped authority on English football, no longer carried the same menace. Yet, even in decline, the legacy remained intact. The setbacks, the birthday saga, the Guardiola feud, the gradual fading, were not erasures of his greatness, but reminders of the fragility of power in football. At his peak, he was unstoppable. In his decline, he was human. And so, as the curtain fell on Yaya Touré's playing days, the question shifted, not what he lost in the end, but what he left behind for Manchester City, for Africa, and for football itself.
When the dust of his playing career settled, Yaya Touré's legacy stood tall, both for Manchester City and for the wider footballing world. At City, he is remembered as the man who delivered belief. His goals at Wembley in 2011 ended decades of frustration, and his dominance in 2012 and 2014 transformed City from aspirants into champions. Long before Pep Guardiola's slick, possession-dominant dynasty, Touré gave City a winning identity. Without him, the foundation stones of the modern Manchester City era would look far shakier. For the Premier League, Touré redefined the expectations of a midfielder. He was not confined to defense nor restricted to attack. He was the bridge, the engine, and sometimes the finisher. His 20-goal season from midfield remains a statistical monument, unmatched in both scale and symbolism. Coaches, pundits, and players alike began to reconsider what a central midfielder could be because of him. For Africa, Touré became an icon. Four-time African Player of the Year, Champions League winner, Premier League champion, his career offered a roadmap for the continent's aspiring footballers. Alongside Didier Drogba and Samuel Eto'o, he proved that African players were not just participants in Europe's elite competitions, but central figures who could shape outcomes and define eras. Yet perhaps the most profound part of his legacy lies in memory. Fans recall the charging runs, the unstoppable free kicks, the aura he carried on the pitch. They also remember the contradictions, the pride, the disputes, the vulnerability of a man who demanded recognition. When history writes Manchester City's rise, Yaya Touré is not a footnote, he is a cornerstone. And though his boots are hung up, the story lives on. Because great talent wins games, but great stories, like Touré's, win hearts.
Great talent wins games, great stories win hearts. This was the untold story of Yaya Touré, the powerhouse who carried Manchester City into a new era.
who gave Africa a symbol of excellence, and who reminded football that one player can change the destiny of a club. If you enjoyed this journey, make sure to subscribe to EPL Legacy Stories for more untold tales of Premier League icons. Up next, we'll uncover another legend whose triumphs and struggles shaped English football forever. Don't miss it.